This is a podcast about our lived experience, which unfortunately includes infant death and subsequent mental health struggles. Please take good care of yourself and only listen if this content feels safe for you right now. We'll still be here when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Judith.
And I'm Alina. We are internet friends turned real-life friends who both experienced the tragic loss of our sons to sudden infant death syndrome in winter of 2021.
In the year after Aiden died, my husband and I both became unemployed. My parents divorced, and we had to move 5 times for various reasons.
And as for me, just a few weeks before my son Quinn died, my then husband had come out to me as a transgender woman and were subsequently divorcing.
It's been a lot.
It's been a lot.
But as long as we're living, we will love our sons deeply and work to make sure that we live a life that makes them proud.
Welcome to As Long As I'm Living podcast.
We're so glad you're here.
Hi everybody, Alina here. This week's episode is one of our most highly requested topics, parenting after loss. As most of you know, Judith does have a living daughter that she gave birth to about a year after Aiden's death, and I, Alina, do not have any living children. So, to help Judith out with this conversation, we are bringing on Katie, Zayn's mom. You may know her from Grieving After Loss on Instagram, and she's actually also a friend of Judith's in real life. I purposely did not join this conversation, worried that it might trigger me, but then I actually listened to this episode and I didn't find it triggering at all. I'm still glad that I didn't join though, because the conversation that follows was really raw. And I think the fact that I wasn't there gave the two of them a little bit more space to complain, because parenting after loss is hard. And I know it's a sensitive topic in the infant loss space because so many of us desperately want a living child in our arms, but that doesn't negate how hard it actually is once they're there. So if this topic, parenting a living child or parenting living children after your baby dies, is hard for you, skip it. You do not have to listen to this episode. I'm serious. That said, if you're on the fence, I didn't find it particularly triggering, so give it a shot, and you can always stop listening. And if you are one of the people who requested this topic, we're sorry it took us so long to get it out to you. But obviously, between the two of us, only one of us has a living child. So we had to figure out the right way to go about recording it. I'm going to send you into the episode now. We're going to have some stories on our Instagram this week and do some interaction there. So please hop on over there. Make sure you follow us at As Long As I'm Living podcast. And I hope you have a great Monday. Bye, everybody.
Katie, I've had a really long, hard day. Have you?
I've had a really awful day. Where to begin?
Welcome to As Long As I'm Living. This week, Alina will not be joining us on the podcast. I'm sure that she's going to she's going to say a little blurb before, so you'll know this by now, but we are going to be talking about parenting after loss. Myself and my guest host, Katie. Katie, I'll let you introduce yourself and your family, but I think we have to just lay it out there that you and I are friends in real life. We met on Instagram, but we are real life friends now.
There's online lost mom friends and then in real life lost mom friends, which is so wonderful.
Which is wonderful. And different.
Very different. And if, your listeners have the opportunity to make in-person real, not that they're not real, but in-person friendships within the lost community are so important. It's just different, right? Different. Like it's a different type of support.
I agree. And some of you may know Katie from her Instagram account, Breathing After Loss. So Katie, I'll let you introduce yourself. How do you introduce yourself and your family? Do whatever.
Gosh, that's always an interesting question. It's like, tell me a bit about yourself. How do I lay it out?
It's like, how much do you want to know?
Do you want to know my favorite color or my
your dead son? Where do you want to start?
Where do we want to start? Yeah. So my name is Katie. Like Judith mentioned, we met via Instagram. I have an Instagram account called Breathing After Loss. I made that account about a month after my first son, Zayn, passed away. My first pregnancy was with my son, and he died when I was 38 weeks pregnant from a true knot in his umbilical cord. And that has completely ruined my life, as so many lost families know, changed my life. And so, yeah, I started that Instagram account just to have like a safe outlet to talk about the realities of what losing your first child feels like. And especially, I don't talk about it too much on my account, but at the time when I made the account, I didn't feel, I mean, obviously within like the pregnancy and infant loss space, there's virtually very limited support. And it's growing, but it's still really limited. But at the time, I remember feeling that there wasn't that much support for young families and young women. Like every time I thought about somebody losing a child, it was always like, a child who was 18 or 7 or, a bit of an older parent. And I remember at the time, some of the resources that I had been connected with, they just it was not someone who was like a young person losing their first child. And so, yeah, that's how Judith and I met. And now
Well, you had posted on your account, like, everyone share where you're from, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I saw that you and I lived in the same area, and I immediately reached out and I was like, let's get coffee. And I feel like I really was insistent.
I almost bailed on that meeting.
Did you really? Why were you worried?
So nervous.
What were you nervous about?
I have actually a lot of social anxiety previous to my son dying, like just meeting new people. I've always been introverted. And so I get nervous meeting new people. And, I don't think we had talked that much on Instagram. So it's not like none. Like, I think, it was for that like Lost Mom Connect. And I remember getting very confused because I remember seeing your Instagram page saying 2 locations. And I didn't realize there was 2 of you at the time. So I was like, is she moving from Boston or she's in LA? Like, I'm so confused.
That is really confusing.
But yeah, I almost bailed. I almost made up an excuse because I was so nervous. Because I was like, what if it's like she doesn't like me, or it's like high school, like my
so
inner child coming out. But I'm so glad I ended up.
We did have a mutual friend. Like, it wasn't like you were a complete perfect stranger, because Alina and your friend traveling with grief, right? I don't
oh
really
yeah,
know. Erica I think they know each other somehow, so we were like interconnected. So I knew you were normal. I knew that you were like a normal person and you were young, and like I knew that. And I also knew that you had a subsequent child, and I had just had my daughter. And so I think I was really lonely for lost parent friends who had new babies, because I remember vividly, I went on like a walk with these 3 moms, and we were all like on maternity leave, and like they had all these alive children, and I just remember wanting to like vomit the entire time, just feeling so different and so awkward. And I am not an awkward person, but the whole time I was like, should I say words? Should I not say words? Like, should I mention Aiden? Should I not mention Aiden? Like, what am I supposed to relate to their pregnancy? I don't know. I didn't know what to do. I just felt so different. And so I was desperately looking for people who had children after their loss, because I thought maybe maybe we could go on walks,
Yeah.
My sights were set low. I just wanted someone to go for a walk with.
I completely agree. I think that's why I ended up pushing through the uncomfort of my own anxiety, because I was also very lonely. I always wanted to have lost mom friends in person. I actually never went to an in-person support group, but I had joined like virtual ones, and they were just not for me for a variety of reasons.
Same.
Support looks different for everybody. And I remember feeling like very lonely. And yes, grief does crazy things to your brain, where the first year of parenting after loss and even being pregnant after loss is so traumatic, that in some ways so beautiful yet so traumatic, that my brain has almost blocked out so many things of it. Like that we both had our kids, our second children, when we met, and for some reason I was like, I thought we met when we were pregnant, but yeah.
No, I think they were both a couple months old. And actually, this is crazy, but our first sons died on the exact same day, which is like a weird freak connection. Like, out of all the days, that 365, they both died on the exact same day, which I thought was so weird. And then our subsequent children are like, they're just a month apart, I think. And so today I really want to talk about parenting after loss. A lot of people have written to us and asked us to talk about parenting after loss. And the reality is it's kind of a tricky conversation because it's very triggering and difficult for Alina. And I myself don't really feel so comfortable talking about it. Like just in general, people are like, you never talk about your daughter, you know, in my normal life. People are like, how's she doing? And I find that I have a hard time articulating it. And so I thought that by having you, who is like primarily my lost mom, my mom, lost mom friend that like I talk to about these things, I thought maybe we could kind of have a conversation that resembles the conversations that we have in real life, which is parenting after loss is so unbelievably challenging and beautiful and fulfilling at the same time. So I guess I want to talk a little bit about how this experience has been for you and like what are some of the things that you think are different about the fact that you're parenting after loss as opposed to like a first-time mom.
And that's a really good segue into it. And especially, I don't know if you felt this way when you're pregnant, because you spend so much time wondering if your baby's going to die. So it's hard to even picture what parenting after loss would be like.
Yeah.
But even from what I thought it would be like when, I was pregnant the second time around, and if my son did live and what my life would look like, it even that looks so different. I don't think anything can prepare you for it. So it's hard to have these types of conversations because everyone's life is just so different and unique to themselves. But especially, the unique situation for us is that we both lost our first child.
Yes.
Right. And so in a lot of ways, and you even more, I mean, I had a stillbirth. And so I'm in this unique position where I'm not a first-time mom, but I'm a first-time mom in a lot of ways, meaning I don't know what it's like to deal with a teething baby, even though this is my second baby. Yeah. And there are so many reminders of those little things, or like strapping the baby into the car seat, or hearing those first words, or even like I can't get my baby to sleep. What are things I can do? And so it puts you in a way, for any new mom, it can be a very isolating experience to go into motherhood, but especially when you are somebody who has experienced loss and you're transitioning into motherhood that you've already been a part of, but there's so many new experiences that, you are experiencing it for the first time. And so that was something like I was aware of sort of when I was pregnant the second time around, but I never knew how much it would hit me of, I'm losing my mind because my baby's crying, but also one of the ways, which is not something I would recommend, but a lot of women have told me that they calm themselves down in those early newborn stages, is like they just thought about their kid being dead all the time. Like, okay, at least they're crying. Like that means they're alive. And, I would have so many intrusive thoughts like that of like, I'm really tired and this is exhausting, but he's crying. So like, he's alive. And so how do I explain it? Like, because some people use those views of, as over time, it'll get better. And at least, this is so even the way I used to comfort myself, I'm like, that's not relatable to, these moms I meet at the group. But then on the flip side, which I know is an area that is really sensitive within the loss community, especially for moms. And I remember feeling this before, I had my second son, is having space to really experience motherhood and the not so fun parts. And trying to hold both these things at the same time, where you have a dead child and there are parts of motherhood with your living children that's not enjoyable. And you feel almost like that pressure of like, well, I didn't get this with them. And so I need to enjoy every moment. And I remember I really struggled.
Because you felt so much pressure to be just grateful. So much pressure, like, you have what you wanted. Why is this hard? Why isn't this what you wanted?
Yeah.
I also feel very lonely because I think part of parenting two children is that there's like all these like sibling things. And I found myself feeling so different from other parents when they were talking about like sibling things, because I could relate, but I couldn't relate. And it felt so lonely to me. Like, it just felt really lonely that they would complain about how the kids were always fighting or how are they going to balance their needs. And I just felt like, I feel that in such a different way. I don't feel I can chime in here, but I can relate to the feeling of both my kids needing me. It's just really hard to fully be on the same page because one of them is dead. And another thing that really was hard for me is when I would go to these mom groups and all these other moms would say like, "Hi, I'm Genevieve and I have 2 kids, Beatrice and Sally." And they all do that. Like the way moms interact with one another is they like lay out everything about their kids. It's like the first thing that they do is they say, "Well, how many kids do you have? How old are they? What are their ages?" And then the second thing they do is they go into like their birth story. They're like, "Oh, I've got, Sally, he's 3, and Beatrice, who's 4." And then they're like, "Oh, when I was pregnant with this one, this happened. When I was pregnant with that one, this happened." Like these are the things that new young moms are talking about. And it's really hard to sit there and have them have those conversations. And then you ask yourself, well, should I bring up my, delivery story with Aiden? Should I not? I just felt like I spent a lot of time being so close to the party, but not into the party. Does that make any sense?
Makes a lot of sense. And especially, and that's sort of the things people, as soon as they're pregnant again, start to experience because it's all of a sudden like, is this your first? How many babies do you have?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, the number of pregnancies doesn't equate to the number of, living children.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop when you're not pregnant. It carries on.
It
Like,
carries
is this your
on.
first? And if you
Yes.
say no, but where's the other kid? Or, if you say yes
Yeah.
because you don't want to, open that
Yes,
area because you're just
100%.
not, in the mental space to. And so I found not only, like you said, there's just so many things that are not relatable. I found myself having anxiety, even just thinking about the types of conversations that could like erupt from,
Uh-huh.
speaking to them in the moment, but also like, hey, I'm lonely. I want to go to this parents group thing,
Yeah.
this baby music and me class, but I'm nervous to talk to another parent because they're going to
Because they're
ask
gonna
me what looks
ask.
innocent question. And especially when you talked about the sibling differences of being a mom to like multiple children, but they're not all living. And you have, whether that you have other people talking about like traditional things as it relates to
Yeah.
children. Like my 2 boys are fighting all the time. I
Yeah.
have a boy and a girl, and they're 2
Yeah.
years apart and everything's perfect. And it's like, well, I have 2 under 2, but one's
One is
dead.
dead.
Like,
Yeah.
I see these things on Instagram, like it's so funny, the algorithm. It's like we're in the lost community and they haven't realized it's like baby loss. So they put it under baby. And so I get
Yeah.
all these videos for like how challenging 2 under 2 is,
Yeah.
or how it's so wonderful. And that for me just is an area that like really hurts my heart
Yeah.
because my sons are a year apart. But and it's hard, and we can sit here all day long to talk about like all the challenges of it. And the one thing I have found that's been helpful is to just 2 things. Number one, like stop forcing friendships and conversations. So when I became a mom to a living child, I just was so lonely and I want to make friends and I need a mom community. And from how you've ever made relationships in your life previously, we're multidimensional. You're not going to become best friends or close with someone who's just a mom. And
Yeah.
so I am going, instead of thinking about, myself going to these groups, I tried to think about it. And my therapist helped me with this, is like something I'm doing with my son, something I'm doing for my second son to take him and expose him to music and babies, or, I like going to yoga. So I'm going to go to a baby and me yoga class. And I found personally when I stopped having a goal to connect with other moms, I actually started to connect with other moms just naturally, like at
Mm.
libraries that I like gravitated
Yeah.
towards too. Because as you use the example of like, moms just talk about their birth stories, and there's moms who don't, go straight in that to you
Yeah.
when they meet you. There's some that are, you're gonna find your people eventually. It's
Let me
just
ask,
more challenging.
do you think if your first hadn't died, like what kind of mom do you think you would have been? Would you have been the type to talk about your birth story? Would you have been the type to like make, I don't know, have your life be your children in that way? Or do you feel like you've always just been like, you want to be a mother, you love your mother, but you're not so interested in the motherhood culture?
It's an interesting question. I think I would have always been this way because my personal view outside of this is I've always thought it was important for women to have identities outside of just being a mother. Not that motherhood isn't the most or one of the most important things a woman who chooses to become a mother will do, but that's one side of you. You are the person that has interests in exercise or art or movies. And so for me, I remember, because I kind of noticed this with dynamics within my own family or within friends, of when they became a mother down the line, they kind of lost their self a little bit, or when their kids got a little bit older, it's like, what about me? What do I do now that my kids are independent? So I think I would have been this way regardless, but it is all consuming. I mean, even I love being involved in like the lost mom community, but now that I have my second son, he just takes so much of my time caring for him and doing things that I've had to take a step back just of how much I'm actually, doing in terms of making content. So it's hard not to just becomes your life, because it does. And then the other thing I actually think is really important, even though I was so reluctant to do this, about kind of exposure therapy, as my therapist calls it. So for a while, I was in these moms groups and I wouldn't want to go to anything. I wouldn't want to go to like a library meetup. I wouldn't want to go on a walk because I was so nervous about the types of conversations that were going to arise. And unfortunately, you're going to have those conversations probably thousands, 10,000 times in your life, from when you have living children, or even if you already have living children, until they're adults. And through exposure from my personal experience, it has gotten a little bit more tolerable to hear is this your first? It still stings. It will always sting, but it doesn't always feel earth-shattering. And I think that's really important for families to know when they're transitioning to, parenthood, or even if they're already, parent to living children and they had a child that died while they have living children. Sometimes exposing yourself, even though it's hard, is important. Because then, like, what do you have kids, like, they're going to go to school, they're going to play sports or art and music class, and someone's going to ask you, if you have any other children. Yeah.
What about, how do you parent like your second? How do you include your first with your second? Like, how do you talk to your second about Zayn? Do you talk to him? Like, how are you planning on doing that?
That's a really great question. I mean, for me, I've always felt it was important to talk about it and, age appropriately, of course, but I never want this to be like a family secret or something that we don't talk about. I mean, and that was another thing I would talk about with my therapist. And as you see a trend, I spent so much time thinking about the unfairness. Like, this is not fair. I don't want, my second son to be having to deal with the fact that, his brother died, and how is this going to impact him? This is the family that he's born into, which is that he's the second son and his brother died. And so for me, it's talking about him when we're young, and it just becomes normalized. And also making children aware that, number one, they're not responsible for your grief. Like, they're not responsible for making you feel better about your circumstances, making them feel that they're their own person and that they're not a replacement, and just kind of normalizing certain rituals. So, we take my second son to the cemetery for Mother's Day and Father's Day, and if I have to go, I bring him. But at the same time, I've thought about it a lot as he gets older, that I can't control like what he's going to feel about our family. And I never want to force him to feel something that he's not. So, I think when he's a bit older, small things like if he wants to come to the cemetery with us, and say if he doesn't want to go, that's his prerogative and his decision. Likewise, if he wants to grieve in a certain way. He's his own person, and it's his grief that is separate from mine. So I think there's such a fine balance, and thankfully there are so many resources out there for siblings who grieve.
Yeah.
And again, my son was born after my first son died, and so that's a very different experience from families who, have children that
They
actually
remember.
experience it. Yeah.
I think for me, I really want Aiden's memory to be joyous. And like, I
Yes.
want us to celebrate. Like, I've been thinking about this a lot with his death anniversary coming up. Like, I want my daughter to be involved in his birthday and his birthday party. But I don't really want her to be very involved in the anniversary of his death, which I know is slightly different from your situation. But, aside from maybe lighting candles as a family, like, I don't want her to see it and be our loss and feel so sad. I mean, obviously she's going to be sad, but I don't want her to feel like it's this sad cloud over our family. I want it to feel like when we think about him, we're grateful that we have each other. And this is, beautiful part of our family, having kind of a guardian angel above. And so for me, it's like, I know that as she gets older, I'm going to want to have his birthday party be like a special family holiday. And even now, like I sing, like when we sing songs, like I'll include him, like I don't know what song I sings with people's name, but there's like all these songs about putting things in pots and going to school, whatever it is, just like I would say Sammy, or I would say Ari, like I also say Aiden, like I include him in these songs, because that's one way that I feel like we can normalize at her age, to make it normal. Sometimes I also have like a picture album of him in the living room, and like we'll go through it. I know she's a baby, she doesn't know, but I want to show her pictures. I want to talk about it in a way that's normal, because I want it to be, like you said, not taboo. I went to like a kids programming thing last week, and they sang the Wheels on the Bus like in the group, and I started like sobbing, and like I just sat in the corner, and like she played and I cried, and all the other parents were clapping and happy, and like I just think that's what my life looks like. It just is. Mom right now is sitting in the corner sometimes crying, and then we got up, I felt better, and we played, and we sang the rest of the songs together. That's just what my life looks like parenting after loss. It looks like singing and crying at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually think as they get older, it's really important to see that multidimensional. Like mom is sad right now for the afternoon, and then because she's having a hard day, and then we can all watch the movie together later. Like it, and that's so different from the way, many people might have grew up.
Yeah,
like I grew up in a, my parents experienced like loss in different ways, but I never saw like emotions about it, or, we didn't talk about it. They didn't grieve around us. And it's just been really interesting how maybe our generation is a little bit more open with grief, because like the same thing, I have like a weighted bear that we keep in my second son room, and like he bites the bear's ear, and it's like, yeah, this is your weighted bear. But I also like, I find a lot of times I get nervous about the future, because I never want my living son to feel like he's like a replacement. And I think seeing this like sadness like makes them understand that more.
Yeah.
Because if they just saw you happy all the time, I think that would be a lot more complicated for them.
I worry about my daughter even listening to this podcast, because sometimes I worry that she might one day listen to this, and I talk so much about being sad, and I don't think I talk enough about how much joy she brings me. I feel like I don't do a good enough job in the context that she might hear this, clarifying that I see her as such a different person in her own story, and also in this story too. Like I really see her both. Like I think she has her own book, her own chapter, her own life, but she's also born into this context of loss. But I don't want her ever to think that just because she was born into a sad time, her birth was sad.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's really important. And that's where, you are a second time mom, because a lot of those feelings that you have, while different, are what second moms experience, that like the second kid's not going to get enough attention. That's another thing my therapist reminds me of trying to pay attention to both of them and worrying about one not getting enough attention. And worrying about the second child not feeling loved and that they're bringing so much happiness. That's, something that really represents you being a second mom. And I will say, because again, like with the parenting after loss, it's so complicated. These feelings can exist together, and it's hard to describe, to people that may not be experiencing it. But, as we talked about all the triggers and the things that are really sad, it's really hard to also understand like how happy you are, because I never thought I could feel this type of happiness again, honestly.
I never thought either.
And then,
I mean, I think I'm a better mother.
Me too, which also makes me sad, but makes me happy. Like me saying that I've never been this happy also hurts, because I have a dead child, but then I also have an alive one. And so, grief is wonky. I think and when you say that you are a better mother, obviously that does not mean your first son should have died. How do you feel like?
No, and I think he would say that I was the best mother ever for him. I don't think I was a bad mother. I think I was equally as good in terms of like loving and joy and care. I think the difference when I say I'm a better mother is I think I'm just more in the moment. I don't really get frustrated even when things are hard, because I just have a different, like I know what's important and what's not important. And I feel like I'm a better mother because I think I'm just like I'm acutely aware that she could die at any time. And for some reason that constantly brings me to the present. Like I just enjoy the present more fully. Do you feel that way too?
Yes. And I don't think, I mean, I always bring it back that the more experiences you have in life, the better for some people they become as people, right? As you grow, you get more empathetic. And so I think that as well. I think I'm patient in a way I would not have been previously, just because for a lot of the reasons that you described, but also we've just experienced such deep trauma that sometimes I'm like, okay, this thing that's annoying me is not that serious. Like,
and I think I'm also able to be like, when she grows up and she has big feelings, I'm going to be much better at just sitting with her in those feelings.
Yes, I definitely think also being more empathetic and more emotionally intelligent and just more present, that things can change at any moment, but also it's really, really hard to parent and grieve at the same time. Like, I think it's made you like a better mother in a lot of ways.
You and I both got pregnant quickly after our loss. So let's talk about pregnancy after loss. For most people, well, I actually don't want to say for most people because I don't know. But what I do know is that grief takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. And the minute you have this baby, you have a lot less energy and a lot less time.
Okay, Alina again. We are going to stop here because Judith and Katie talked for over an hour. So we're actually going to do a follow-up episode that will come out in a couple of weeks. Don't worry. We will talk about it on Instagram, so you'll know when it's coming out. In that episode, they talk about how exhausting grieving while parenting is. They talk about celebrating alive and dead babies' birthdays and the differences. They also talk about being a first-time mom for the second time, among so many other things. So stay tuned for that, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
To all of our wonderful new friends, we want to hear from you. Email us at aslongasimlivingpodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at aslongasimlivingpodcast. We'll get back to you as soon as our grieving brains allow. Yay!